got to maintain your own vitality and your own health. And that's not just physical, but mental, spiritual. And if you don't unplug from your work cycle every now and again, it's going to come apart.
Welcome to this week's Escape Your Limits podcast, and today we speak to a strength and conditioning specialist. He's responsible for training NFL champions, MMA fighters, and also X Games gold medalist. He's also a very accomplished product inventor. He's known for developing a product called the Rip 360, which he went on to sell a year later to TRX, and it became the TRX Rip Trainer. He's also developed an extremely successful product recently called the Nautilus Glute Drive. In this episode, we talk about Pete's journey as a product inventor and developer, some of the lessons he learned about developing products and the challenges he had with taking it to market. We talk about failure, what failure means to him and how he used it to fuel him going forward. And we also talk about the similarities between a world-class athlete and a business person and entrepreneur. I really hope you enjoy the Escape Your Limits podcast, the guests we have on and the subjects we talk about. It will be great for us to get this out to a lot more people, and you could certainly help us doing it by sharing it, leave a review, and leave a comment. Thanks very much for listening and supporting the Escape Your Limits podcast. Pete Holman, thanks for coming to Newport Beach.
Oh, it was really rough to make this journey out past Miramar and the seagulls flying and the surfers on the waves. Brutal.
So where have you been?
I was down in San Diego. I work with Todd Durkin's mastermind group, and I was actually filming a podcast for Todd Durkin down in San Diego. And it was interesting driving up here. Normally I'm just in a race to get everywhere in life. And I actually had 2 or 3 hours of free time, and I was driving up the coast highway, and seagulls are flying by, and I pulled off to the beach, and I just sat on the beach for like a half an hour, and I said, now this is living. Southern California, I'm jealous.
Yeah. So I was reading about that actually, and you that you used to, when you was traveling back in your sort of TRX days, plug for our friends at TRX there.
Of course.
That you used to kind of study your your workshops and all your technical stuff, and then you decided that you were going to study something else and write a novel. Is that right?
That is correct. I did a lot of traveling with TRX, and it was wonderful, an amazing experience. But you get burnt out when all you do is talk about strength and conditioning and posture and alignment and core performance and TRX, which is wonderful. You want some relief. And so it was one time I was flying back from Asia, and it was like a 12-hour flight. And so I watched a movie. I was like, I'm just watching a movie. I'm relaxing. And then I was like, I'm watching another movie. But after 2 movies, it's like, okay, I need to do something productive. I didn't want to do strength and conditioning, but I wanted to write. And so I thought, I'm just going to make up a character. And of course, it had to be an underdog. It had to be an athlete, as somebody that was either mentored or led somewhere and actualized his human potential. And so I came up with this fictional character, and that was the start of this book that I actually just launched called Cruise.
And how long did it take to write it?
7 years. Yeah. I'm not sure I'd recommend it to folks at home, but writing, interesting thing about fictional work is you can write about whatever you want on the face of the earth, and it's liberating and beautiful and amazing. The problem is you can write about whatever you want on the face of the earth, and it's confusing and daunting, and you don't know which avenues to go and how to develop the characters and plot twists and red threads and conclusions, and it's stressful, but liberating at the same time, if that makes sense. I guess that's life.
Yeah. How do you find if you put that in terms of life and business then, do you think that whether you're an athlete or an entrepreneur or whatever, it's important to kind of have that opposite of what you're doing to be able to be better at what you're actually doing? So that sort of downtime, that rest, that anti stuff. In terms of what you did with your book, did you think that sort of helped what you was trying to do, or was it distraction?
Yes, it was distraction. I've also always been very curious, and I'm not sure where that comes from. I think my parents were fairly curious. They were fairly highly educated, both PhDs in psychology. And my mom played the flute and rode horses and liked to garden. My father was a 3-sport athlete and worked on a farm and loved to cook. And they're just kind of interesting characters. And so I think some of that trickled down into me. And I remember studying Leonardo da Vinci back in the day. And everybody knows who Leonardo da Vinci is. But if you really look at what he's done, I mean, it's unbelievable. He was a mechanical engineer. He was a civil engineer. He was basically an anatomist, a surgeon. He studied not just humans, but animals. And he understood kinesiology. And he got into inventions and created the first iterations of helicopters and war machines. And he got into business. He was licensing his products to militias. I mean, the guy is just unbelievable. And I always thought, what would Leo do? Leonardo. And so I'm very curious about what we can do as humans, unlocking our human potential. And I think that involves getting out of your comfort zone and doing things that maybe you hadn't thought about doing, writing a fictional book. It could be anything. It doesn't have to be intense or productive. It could be like picking up an instrument. I was learning to play piano or guitar. It's something I've been doing in the last 20 years of my life is I learned to play the guitar. And it's so therapeutic for me. And I think it certainly helps me as an individual, my self-development, but I think it also makes people a little more interesting, having diverse interests and skills. And they're not mutually exclusive. They tend to, guitar, for instance, takes a tremendous amount of patience and discipline. And you practice scales and you do stuff that you don't really want to do. Well, that translates into business. I don't like to do administrative stuff. I don't like to do sales and marketing. I like to create and invent products and programming. But you have to do the other stuff to make it all work. So,
yeah. Do you think that some of your habits that you've been particularly good at are what's sort of taking you into different directions? So I guess, and we can talk about it in a moment, but you've been involved in different sports and you've mastered them and you've been the top at your game in lots of different areas. Do you think, maybe you've not thought about it, but do you think some of those things in terms of, picking something to do, mastering the basics, being good at it, focusing, all those things are relative, whether you're writing a book, whether you're being a world taekwondo champion or what have you? What's your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I mean, it's process, right? And probably the first time I really understood process was in martial arts. And I started training. Most people don't realize this. I was a U.S. national taekwondo champion, and that's fairly well known on my resume and on my website and that sort of thing. But what people don't know is that I started training when I was 20, 21 years old for martial arts.
That's quite old.
It's quite, all the people I was training with had been doing it since 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old. They had 8, 10 years on me. Right. But I fell in love with the process of methodically stretching 2-3 times a day, strength and conditioning, doing rehab when I was injured, and working on all the fundamental basics that really are not that fun and sexy. And all of a sudden, I tested for my red belt, tested for my red belt with a black stripe, which is right before you get your black belt. Normally people take a couple, 2-3 years to get their actual black belt testing. And my coach was like, Pete, I don't know what's going on, but you're very gifted. I played soccer growing up, so I was really good with my feet. And I was very flexible because I stretched methodically. And he said, you could make the national team. We're going to Kuala Terengganu, Malaysia for the World Championships in 1994. You got a chance. I said, I'm not even a black belt. He says, well, you got to get your black belt first, and then you can try out at nationals. And so it had never been done before. In 6 months, I tested for my black belt, and I was the high test score. 4 months later was nationals, and I didn't crush it, but I was strong. And I think I took second in sparring, first in power breaking, and patterns were terrible. But I was selected for my first national team, and then 3 years later, I was the team captain for the national team. And that was all because of this process. And it absolutely applies to business, even relationships. It's like the garden. People want a beautiful garden. They just don't want to weed, right? Pick the weeds and prune the shrubs and all the beautiful flowers. You got to pick the weeds and trim and prune. and that's part of the process. And so it absolutely applies.
Yeah, and you're quite an academic as well. Did that give you, what came first, the athletic side of you or the sort of academic drive? You mentioned your father and that. Were they influencing you to go along that path?
So that's interesting. I was actually in school. I had an undergraduate in psychology, and I was going to follow in both my parents' footsteps and be a psychologist. I thought it was fascinating. And then one time I had a very deep conversation with my mom. I said, tell me about your patients and who they are and how you help them. And some of the stories she shared with me, I was like, wait, this guy did what to his kid? And I just couldn't believe that people could behave in such a manner. And it really turned me off. And I know, and so it's great, psychologists out there and mental health professionals, I have all my admiration because they deal with very intense subject matter, but I knew that wasn't in my constitution to do that. So I had to pivot, and at the same time, it was right about when I was starting to train in Taekwondo, and I was constantly injured. And I had torn my ACL. I was also a big skier in Colorado. I had torn my ACL, and I started working with a physical therapist who, she was amazing. Her name was Susan, and she helped me understand human anatomy, understand how the knee functioned and how I needed to get stability and balance and proprioception and acceleration and deceleration, being able to control all that. And I was fascinated, and she was way smarter than me, because I was kind of a fledgling personal trainer at the time. And I said, maybe this is it, physical therapy. So I got on this kind of bend for physical therapy, and I applied to school. It took me 3 years to get into school. By the way, talk about process, because I'd take all my undergraduate was in psychology, right? Which is, social sciences and sociology and anthropology and psychology. I needed science. I needed hard science, anatomy, kinesiology, physiology. So I had to go back to school, take all that, and then apply to graduate school. And so I finally got into a master's of science program for physical therapy. But I knew, and this was over a 10-year stretch, and I wasn't making any money.
How old was you then?
I was 25 when I got into graduate school, which is a little bit older for some of the kids. They went straight out of high school or college went right into graduate school, and I had all this debt. And my partner at the time, she was like, "You're nuts! You're going to go back to school. We need money. What are you thinking?" And I knew I needed higher education for what I was going to do and what my career trajectory was supposed to be. And so, I think knowledge is power. Very cliche, but you hear when people talk, they either have a command of what they're saying and understand in depth subject matter and content, or they're superficial. And the superficial people, they don't make good sales people if you're selling fitness products. They don't make good executive management people. And so you're limited by that. So education is, now you don't have to go into graduate school. You can educate. I mean, there's people in prison that read all day and educate themselves. It's fine, but academics are huge.
Do you think that you decided to study kind of quite late in life, I suppose, for most people when you decided what you wanted to do? Do you think that you've got to get that balance between just, I guess, gaining lots of information and then using information specifically to apply it? Because I suppose we talked about Conor McGregor earlier on when he was 19, and he was very clear about what he wanted to do. At a young age, did you know what you wanted to do and started to follow that path, or did you then start to study once you felt you knew what you wanted to do?
Well, it's interesting. So there was all this hubbub in Taekwondo. There's a lot of politics in everything, as you know, and there's politics in sports. And so this federation that I was involved with, International Taekwondo Federation, which was great, but they had these little, you could go to a camp, and train for 6 months, and you could get like your second-degree black. They had these accelerated tracks and trajectories, and they sound wonderful on paper. Like, ooh, I can accelerate everything, but life doesn't work like that. You can't force acceleration. You have to allow learning and assimilation time to back to the garden analogy. The garden takes time to grow, and I was always very late developing. I was late developing physically. I told you about my martial arts. I was kind of late figuring out what sport I really wanted to gravitate towards. I always wanted to be a professional athlete. I just couldn't figure out, was it extreme skiing? Was it soccer? Clearly it wasn't football. I didn't have the speed or the size. So there's a benefit in breathing, relaxing, and enjoying that process. The journey. I mean, one of Bruce Lee's famous quotes is, "In every passionate pursuit, the pursuit counts more than the object being pursued." The pursuit counts more than the object being pursued, and that's brilliant. It's like, it's cliche. It's about the journey, but
it's difficult to live that as well, isn't it? I guess particularly in this day and age where, like the social media world where it's everything, and you talk about, fast track course to this, there's all these different workshops where you can go and be a millionaire, or you can go and do this within 6 weeks, or you can lose this weight. So I suppose, most marketing is about the goal and not the pursuit. And I find it sometimes difficult not to get caught up in chasing the wrong thing.
I think we all do. And I mean, that's one of the problems with our fitness industry. We're both in this industry, which we love and adore, but people, they buy what they want to hear. And so, unfortunately, a lot of the industry tells the consumer what they want to hear, not what they need to hear. And what they need to hear is, listen, this is a lifestyle. This is a process. I call it a health savings account. Warren Buffett doesn't say, "Oh, go to Vegas and put it on black and let's go and let's make $1 million." He says, listen, start a little savings, diversify, invest here and invest there. Over time, you watch it compound and grow. And if you're patient and intelligent about what you're doing and don't take big risks, you'll look back in 20, 30, 40 years and go, wow. And it's brilliant. Nobody wants to do it. But guess what? Your health and fitness is exactly the same. And I have clients. I train a lot of wealthy clients in Aspen. And these people have had access to high-level training and outdoor activity. They've got a lot of free time. So, they've got no excuse not to train. But they have invested in their health savings account. And now they're 70 years old and they're still skiing moguls and have flat stomachs. I mean, it's unbelievable. And they're mobile and active and balanced. And you look at somebody like that, and in an instant, you can tell they've invested and they've focused on the process. The 6, 8 week, 12-week programs, or it's January 1st, let's do this. Maybe it's great for a kickstart, but if you're not thinking long term and hunkering down on it, your chances of being successful are minimized.
So if we switch to business now, so you've certainly we were connected through one of your earlier products. I think it was called Ripcord FX when we first met, you and Jeff. I actually met Jeff first in England, and then he sort of connected us to it, and I think it was just prior to you selling the company. I think that's where
I don't even remember that.
Yeah, Jeff. I think Jeff came to England with Ryan, I think, and when you were trying to get it off the ground, and I think the sale happened, and we went from there. So that's how I first met you, from one of your first products. But I heard there was a product before that, wasn't there? You kind of invented something else, some sort of.
There was. It was a physical therapy product called the Functional Training Rack. It's actually something you guys should consider. I got no patent, so you do whatever you want. But it was really cool. It was a medicine ball rack, which you see in every gym, but it had an angle to it. So beneath it, there was slats for tilt boards, wobble boards, Bosu ball, and then it had antennas coming off the edge. And one thing I noticed in my physical therapy clinic, whenever I wanted elastic resistance or a foam roller or a stretching mat, I could never find them, or they were all over the floor and just looked like a mess. And so I thought, what if there was something that we could get all that stuff up off the floor and organize it? And it was this functional training rack. So the antennas, you could hang sports cords. There was little canisters that came out that you could slide foam rollers and yoga mats into. And it was really slick. I'm not sure I invented it, but I'm pretty confident that I did. There's a stability ball hoop design. And before 2008, you tell me if you'd ever seen a hoop. Now you can buy from Perform Better or Go for Power Systems. These distributors, these fitness catalog distributors. You can buy a hoop that comes out and has a little circle, and you rest a stability ball in it, and they're great. And that was part of the functional training rack. So there's different versions that held all this stuff, and I was disenfranchised by my physical therapy experience and having to find stuff and have it be cluttered. And so I saw a problem and I came up with a solution, and I lost my ass financially. I had no clue what I was doing. It was 2008 or 9. China was buying all the steel for the Olympics. And the real estate
Prices
market was collapsing here in America. We had all these real estate investment trusts. Everything was dying, and gas prices and oil prices went up. Long story short, my cost of goods went up 50%, and I was sank. And I ended up selling the rest of my product to Perform Better, which is a distributor catalog. But that was my foray into product design and invention. And I kind of got the bug that you can really, if you're creative, you can come up with something. Then it was just, how do I figure out the business side of it? And that's when I got more into kind of the licensing model and having somebody that really knows distribution, and they have a sales network and channels, and let them do all the sales and marketing and distribution, and I'll be the inventor behind it.
Yeah. And when, in terms of inventing then, so what was your, what do you think was your skill or driver to be able to create a product? Were you constantly looking for a problem or identifying a problem and saying, how can I fix that? Or what was your sort of journey? Because a lot of people have these product ideas, but where did you come from on that?
That's exactly it. It just starts with a problem. It's something that, I've been personal training and doing physical therapy for better part of a quarter century, and you just get frustrated by the things you see. And so you think, I could figure out how to do this better or easier. And that's always been how things have started. I just see something in my daily practice. My latest invention, which I licensed to Nautilus, it's called the Glute Drive. It's crushing it. It's a plate-loaded hip thrust machine, which works on your glutes and your hamstrings.
I just delivered one at our Equinox up the road, actually.
Is there really? Have you tried it yet?
Yeah, I've not tried it. I've seen it. It went in there a few days ago.
Oh,
so.
There'll be a line behind it. It's a great machine, and it's a very simple concept. But so a glute bridge is very common in physical therapy and strength and conditioning. All the strength coaches use it to strengthen and activate the glutes and hamstrings.
And a lot of the Instagram girls as well.
Yeah, of course, there's the aesthetic component of you're tightening your tush. But it's basic. If you don't know what a hip press is, or a glute press, you're on your back, your knees are bent at 90 degrees, and you just lift your pelvis off the ground, and it engages your backside. And so, but you can elevate your back and get more range of motion by being on a horizontal bench. So I had my client on a horizontal bench, and he had a dumbbell in his lap, and we were doing hip thrusts, and he said, it really hurts my shoulders. And of course, the first thought I had was, what a wimp, are you kidding me? Like, it's a pad. But anyhow, I said, all right, professionally, let me figure out how I can help him. So I got an TRX foam pad, which is just a block of foam, soft, and I put it behind his scapula so that as he did the hip thrust, his shoulders were unloaded. And as I noticed him from the profile, the TRX pad was articulating like a bench perfectly. It like almost kept his back in alignment. And I said, why isn't there a machine that you can just get on and articulate with the back pad and put some weights on? And that was the that was the first time I thought about the glute drive. And I created it. I drew on a napkin at Ursa. I had it in my head. This was about a week or two before Ursa. And I went to Ursa in 2017. And Ursa is a big trade show with tons of fitness products and all the latest and greatest widgets and gadgets and high-tech stuff. And it's very inspirational to be there. If you're into fitness at all, it gets you goosebumps because it's just all about health and wellness and vitality. It's up our alley. And I was there, and I looked at the trade show from top to bottom, because somebody had to have invented this. That's in the back of your mind. It's got to be out there. And there was nothing. There was no plate-loaded hip thrust machines. And so I went to my hotel, the Marriott and drew it up on a little pad. And a year and a half later, I had it licensed to Nautilus, and we launched it. And by the way, I just got a patent on it, so give me some love there. My first patent. That's not bad.
So did you, with the Rip Trainer then, did you not have a patent on that?
I applied for a patent. Patents are very challenging to get. I mean, you start looking up. A great example is if you're a business owner and you want to start a new business, and you say, oh, I want to be Joe's Subway Shop, and you start looking up Joe's Subway Shop and 3,000 Joe, and you trying to differentiate yourself and trying to have a trademark and a unique name is very challenging. And the same is true with patents. Everything's been done out there. By the way, a lot of people file for a patent and they haven't launched a product ever. They just sit on it, waiting for somebody else to do all the hard work. And then they say, oh, by the way, you're infringing on my patent and I want 5% royalties or 10%, So it's
very idea actually.
No.
But you have to pay to keep it up.
But you have to you pay the price. Patents are very challenging, to have them come to fruition. So, it's a long, arduous process, and that's one of the things that prohibits a lot of people from seeking out new inventions.
So how did you, with something like the TRX Rip Trainer, which you sold, Rip 360, was 360?
It was called the Ripcord FX.
Ripcord FX, sorry.
People can never, they call it the Rip Stick, the Ripcord, it was the Ripcord FX.
So you did a great job at being able to sell a product without a patent, I guess, very simple product.
Well, we had a patent pending on it,
right.
And there were some elements, and my partner was Jeff Hewling and another guy, Bill Fabricini. Bill was more involved in education, and he did a brilliant physical therapist. He did a great education tract. And then Jeff Hewling he was the CEO. He was the smartest of all of us. And he understood sales and marketing and business strategy. And he was the first one that thought we need a group station where you could have multiple users on a central pillar that attached the Ripcord FX to, and you could go off and like a fan and work out. If you don't know what I'm talking about, the Ripcord FX, which is now the TRX Rip Trainer, it's the simplest thing. It's a stick with a cord on the end, an elastic cord. You anchor the elastic cord, and as you start to push and pull this thing, it creates resistance and balance challenges and core activation. And it's actually a really cool, simple yet effective device. So we had a patent pending, and my buddy Jeff, he was very good friends with the head of sales at TRX, Ryan Damon. Ryan was a Division I lacrosse player, so he kind of understood how to handle a stick from a lacrosse stick and torque loads and how to overcome torque and resistance in that rotational plane of motion. And so he was telling Randy Hetrick, who was the owner of TRX, about us and like, hey, these guys. And we were brilliant at capitalizing on or leveraging everything we did. So we would do a little event in the park, when 50 people would show up, and it was a great turnout. But we'd have video, we'd have a DJ, we'd have, granola bars and massage therapy. And all of a sudden, you'd look at this thing like on video, it's like a huge event. Like, who are these guys? And, we were out of the back of our truck. We had no money. We were just winging things. Hadn't showered. Our hair was all messed up. But Randy Hetrick got wind of this and said, we should, maybe we're looking at expanding our product line at TRX, and this seems to fit into what we're doing. It's fitness anytime, anywhere. The price point's about the same. You can use them outside, and it wasn't cannibalizing the TRX suspension trainer. It was complementing it. But we didn't know what would happen. And at one club industry event, Randy and a couple of his executive management team went through a workout. And I'm a very emotional guy, and Randy's emotional, and we're both kind of like alpha males and stuff. And so they were like, Pete, you just go, wait, let us handle this. I said, all right. So I'm standing up above, and these guys are working out, and I'm like on a pedestrian crossway. Nobody could see me. I'm like spying on my own product. It was ridiculous. And I don't know if Randy's ever heard this story. And they were down there, and I could just see Randy, like his head was doing this. after each, and then he was gassed and he was bent over trying to catch his breath and his eyes were like wide open. I said, "Oh, we got him." and it was a great, there's always trials and tribulations of a fitness entrepreneur, especially when you're a small guy and a small team. And so we had some navigational errors throughout the process, but it was a great platform for me. It was a great experience. The team at TRX, there was 2 or 3 years there where it was the most outstanding work environment I've ever been involved in. And then, you start getting bigger and international, and it's challenging to maintain that.
Yeah. What would you say for, I guess, companies that probably are smaller, which he was, and then sort of, I guess it's very tempting, and I don't know your motivations, but to sort of say, bigger company comes up and offers to, whatever, write you a check or something. And I suppose it's, for a lot of people, it's like you put it into it and it's almost like a sense of kind of like approval. It's like, yeah, you've kind of made it. What, looking back now, what's your thoughts on that, where, that's a big decision, and I think a lot of entrepreneurs have to make that. What advice would you give after doing it?
It is a big decision, and it's so variable, right? We were at a spot where we needed another round of capital. We had an angel investor, and we had done so well with our money. I mean, somebody had given us the advice that when you get money and you're in a startup, you coddle it like a newborn infant. I mean, you're staying at the cheapest hotels. You're not flying. You're driving to events, and we did all that. But the burn rate when you launch a new website, product DVDs and wall posters and inventory, the burn rate's pretty astounding, and you don't realize that. And then you got to live. You got to have something coming into your bank account. So we were at a point where we needed more capital. We started flirting with TRX and talking to them. And by the way, you don't want to be seeking new capital when you're almost out of capital, because what happens is you start to get in a rhythm, and you're like, hey, we're selling product. We've got events booked. We've got education booked. And now you don't have any money to fly around, to do the events, to buy inventory, to manage your website, to do social media. And you're just in a panic, because now your time all of a sudden has to immediately shift towards raising money, which is extremely time consuming. I mean, updating your executive summaries, flying around, meeting potential investors, due diligence back and forth. It just burns all your time. So we were in a spot where it was, we could have done either, and we elected to go with TRX. At the time, keep in mind, 2011, TRX, now there's still a juggernaut, right, in the functional fitness space and in fitness in general. But at that time, they were the hottest brand. I mean, it was like, well, you're dating a supermodel or something. Like, this could be trouble, and I don't know if I can afford this, or I don't know if it's going to work out. But you kind of like, let's give it a shot. So we elected to do that. Hindsight's always 20/20.
Yeah.
Hindsight, I would have said we should have just gone to Ursa and launched on our own and let the chips fall as they may. But again, that's 2020. So it's a very subjective decision. And the one thing you can't do is you can't look at your P&L and your track record, and if you're just bleeding and you just, there's a sense, it's like the Titanic, there's a famous scene in the Titanic movie, a great movie with Leonardo DiCaprio, and there's violinists and cellists playing on the boat as it's sinking, and so you don't want to be that guy or gal, right? You're not playing on you're not going down with the ship. At some point, if you have to pull the ripcord and get out of there, get out, and that's what I did with the functional training rack. I knew this is not sustainable. There was too many issues. It just wasn't lining up. And my ego told me, oh, but it's such a great idea. It's so beautiful. Look at them. They're selling. But my intelligence said, yeah, but you've got all these other parameters that you can't fulfill. And so I pulled the cord on that, and I failed. It was my first business. I failed at it.
What do you? And I suppose you say it's failure. I'd probably look at it another way, because I guess most people fall in love with their product, and that's that could probably be even a bigger downfall, because you're left with nothing. What's your view on failure? Or how do you define it? What does it mean to you?
I mean, it's amazing to me. People go through life, including myself, by the way. So I'm not throwing any stones, but we go through life and we want this kind of, rainbows and unicorns and gravy and, filet mignon steaks and just skating through job promotions, acceleration to the upper executive management team, and then we own our own business. It does not work like that. I mean, you have to walk through the mud and the schlep to get anywhere. And the interesting thing, it's through that adversity that you grow and develop and evolve, and that's where you get all your skill set from. If you talk to any successful business entrepreneur on the face of the earth, they've failed multiple times. I mean, I worked for a guy in Aspen. I have all these high-end clients, and it's really pretty cool to talk to these people because you get to know them intimately, training 2 or 3 times a week. And one of my clients was a billionaire. He was on the Forbes 500 list, and it's not an easy feat. His father was a cab driver, a musician. He was actually a musician that was forced in the Great Depression to work as a cab driver because they couldn't make any money as a musician. And he always joked his parents had one fight. It just went on their whole lives. It was about money, right? It was the one fight they had. But he was selling cashmere sweaters out of a suitcase at the start, and he ended up being one of the wealthiest clothing manufacturers and licensors in the world, and became a billionaire. But at one point, he was about to file bankruptcy. And he tells me this story, and I'm like, we're in his penthouse in New York, Central Park South, and we just got back from his Florida estate, near Trump's Mar-a-Lago, and you're just like, wait, you almost failed? And he's like, yeah, I was this close to being done. But this guy's a pit bull, and he kept fighting, and he figured out with his intellect how to navigate business and how to succeed. So I always look at it this way, there is no triumph without tragedy. There is no comeback without a setback. And without a test, there is no testimony. So it's kind of like through failure is how we grow and achieve success. And once you realize that, you're so much ahead of the game.
Yeah. With your experience, and I guess some of the clients that you've worked with, how much of it is just being super smart, kind of Elon Musk level, or I know you've got a very strong work ethic. I've worked alongside you when we were with TRX. How much does the sort of work and the turning up affect the success in your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been, Elon Musk is on the spectrum. In fact, I've got a friend that went to what's the island, Necker Island, where Richard Branson has these business summits and meetings, and he was down there and he met Elon Musk, and he said it was kind of interesting. Like, it took him a while to make a human connection with him because he's so out, I don't say out there, but his brain is just working at 1,000 miles an hour, and it makes him a little socially quirky. And then he did finally meet him, and he said he's a really nice guy and brilliant in that. But I think everybody's a little different. I've found that if you don't have the intelligence, you can always utilize your resources. In other words, you can get intelligent people around you. You can summon help from others. Richard Branson talks about this all the time. I mean, he says, I want to be the dumbest guy in the room. Like, I'm going to hire out all these other hot shots and 5-star people to accelerate and enhance my business. And of course, he's very humble and modest. He's a brilliant guy, and it takes the vision and the humility to say, hey, I'm going to get some smarter people in these avenues. But he's the one that brings them together. So, you got to utilize your resources. And at the end of the day, you do have to work hard. I mean, rarely do I see a successful businessman or woman that just kind of skates by. And, I love that Timothy Ferriss, has this book, The 4-Hour Workweek, and everybody's read it, and they say, oh, this sounds great. I'll work from my beach down in Newport, and I'll just be sipping a Mai Tai and, doing some consulting work for $1,500 an hour, and this will be gravy. And it's like, how many people have read that book and actually executed on that plan? It's what Timothy Ferriss, and bless his heart, but what he doesn't talk about much is everything that came before that time period where he's now working 4 hours.
Yeah, right.
Do you know what I mean? It's all this process and climbing uphill into the wind on a sandy hill that has gotten him to that point. So your work ethic is imperative to your success, but I think also it's important to be phasic with it.
What do you mean by that?
Well, so people, Steve Jobs is one. He didn't have an off switch. He didn't take vacations. He didn't hang out with his family on the beach. He did, like I was saying on my drive up here, I stopped. You've got to maintain your own vitality and your own health, and that's not just physical, but mental, spiritual. And if you don't unplug from your work cycle every now and again, it's going to come apart.
Is that what your book does for you? Is that sort of unplugging, do you think?
Yeah, the book was a huge part of that. And now the phases can be of varying length.
Right.
Some people, it might be a 6 or 9 month phase where you're just grinding. But at some point, you got to just say, all right, I don't care. I'm taking 10 days and I'm going to Mexico with my loved ones or my buddies or by myself, and I'm going to recharge. And I think, because on your deathbed, nobody says, oh, I was so 16-hour work days. That was awesome. They have accomplishments, but they also remember those unique experiences where they got to travel or they had time stood still with their loved ones or their family.
Yeah. I guess, certainly my experience, and I'd be interested to hear what you say, is if you compare the human body, how you would train an elite athlete, and then compare that to a sort of a business person, entrepreneur that may, nowadays I guess more and more of them do work out, but in a lot of cases they don't. I suppose I'm interested to see, if you're going to be an elite business person in comparison to an athlete, and everybody talks about this work, 24/7, get a few hours sleep. What in your experience, where you're actually training people to be their best, what do you think is optimal for the body, mind, the whole sort of nervous system? Do you think that sort of get a little bit of sleep and work hard is best, or do you think in the long run, kind of getting the balance is going to be better for people? What do you
listen?
see?
There's a lot of research coming out now, whether it be sleep studies, recovery studies, of course, nutritional analysis and metrics, and what they're all alluding to is that you gotta, you don't, even if you have a Maserati, you don't run it at 12,000 RPMs for 16 hours. That's not how it works. You take pit stops, you change the tires, you replace the oil, you adjust the timing and the fuel injectors. The driver has to get some water. So you have to treat your body the same way. There was a very interesting speaker from the Stanford Research Project at Aspen Brain Lab. It was the Aspen Brain Lab a couple summers ago, and that's all they do is they study sleep. And it's really easy to study, actually, because you just basically, certain people get X amount of sleep, let's say 8.5, 9 hours. Other people get 5 hours of sleep, and they have control groups, and they just wake you up after 5 hours, even if you're in deep REM sleep, and then they test you on executive function, and it's the significant difference is unbelievable. I mean, it's like people can't process quickly, they can't retain information. Their short-term memory is dramatically impacted by sleep deprivation. Now, I'm not saying there's anomalies, right? There's outliers in everything. And there's some people that literally, I don't know how they do it. They function on 5 hours of sleep, 4 hours of sleep. I just turned 50 and I'm like, 9 hours, I'm almost embarrassed to say it, but when I get 9 hours of sleep, I feel like I could run through a brick wall. I mean, literally. And when I get 7, I'm like, man, I'm just not, I can't train hard. I'm a mess. So, sleep, nutrition's the same. I notice it, you go and, if you pay attention to it, you will notice it. You go out and you have, I'm going to cheat tonight. I'm going to have a pizza and some ice cream and a soda. And you wake up the next day, and how do you feel? Versus when you've had, a spinach kale salad with some grilled salmon, or whatever your preference is, but something clean and healthy and that fuels you. So an analogy to business is you can run hard. Sometimes if you're in a startup and you're an entrepreneur, you don't have a choice. You're skipping meals, you're skipping workouts because it's that phase. But you got to figure out how to incorporate some of that healthy lifestyle because you don't want to be Steve Jobs or somebody that, or a lot of people, how many businesses fail that are startups? Yeah. What's the percentage? So your chances of failing are there anyhow. You may as well get some sleep one night and have a little workout and take care of yourself.
Deal with your problems when you're rested as opposed to when you're tired.
Yeah.
One of the things I've heard you talk about is your sort of visualization, particularly as you were preparing for your taekwondo. Do you relate that into your business? I'll sort of explain what I mean. So, one of the things again in business is particularly when you're starting, it's very easy to go from meeting to meeting and decision to decision and buy, sell, whatever. And I suppose when listening to you talking about meditation and your breathing and your visualization, I suppose although I don't do it, it seems to be an opportunity to kind of disconnect and reflect and think before you go ahead and take on that person or make that fight. What part do you tell me your views on visualization and mindset and how that relates to the business life as well?
That's a brilliant question. And visualization, if you talk to any high-level athlete across the board, football, baseball, basketball, soccer, lacrosse, World Cup skiing, World Cup soccer, they all visualize. And there's a reason they do it, because you're setting your intention. And it's like Wayne Dyer says, or any of these, and Tony Robbins, they're all saying the same thing. You've got to set your intention. It's about belief. We talked about Conor McGregor, and he visualizes all the time. He sees himself as a UFC champion. He sees himself as a multimillionaire. He sees himself driving around in a Bentley. Maybe a little superficial, but the point is he's getting into a position now in his life where he can have a dramatic impact. We don't know what he's going to do in the next 10, 20 years, but he's in a position to do whatever he wants now. And he can really help impact a lot of people. And so visualization is huge. And part of that is taking the time out to do it. And so sometimes when I unplug, it's, first of all, it's for personal, mental, physical, spiritual, conditioning or wind down time. But then also I will have strategic plan concepts for the quarter, for the year, for the next 3, usually not too in depth into the future, but 1 to 3 year plans. And you jot down like, hey, where do I want to be? Who do I want to be around? What do I want to be doing? Not just business wise, but spiritually, mentally, physically. And you set your intention, and that's a form of visualization. And actually, Emmitt Smith, I know you're not a huge NFL football fan, but Emmitt Smith was a Hall of Fame running back from the Dallas Cowboys, and he said a dream is just a dream until you write it down. As soon as you write it down, it's reality, right? And it's even better if you show it to somebody else, because now you're held accountable, and you've shown somebody else your dream, your vision of the future. And so I recommend everybody, and this is something I did all the time in martial arts, especially with, my specialty was power breaking, and I love sparring as well. But
what's power breaking?
Power breaking is just this asinine thing you do. You stack wood together. Everybody's seen, you hold a board and somebody breaks it, like Karate Kid style. And it's very easy. It's fun and games, 1 or 2 boards. Once you start stacking boards together, 5, 6, 7 boards, it creates, and they're all, the grain of the wood is all different, weaves and cross grain, and it's like a block of concrete. And you got to punch through this thing, or knife hand through it, or kick through it. And I'm telling you, if you're off 1 inch, I actually dislocated my 4th and 5th metacarpals here in Russia, power breaking. I got the break, but it's just hardcore, and these 2 bones were like sticking, not through the skin, but up like this. But if you're off 1 inch, you miss the break and you break your hand or you foul out. And so before that, it's just, you see yourself contacting the wood with power and force, with grace and fluidity and sting, and you go through it, you penetrate, and you pull your foot or your hand out, and you literally open your eyes and you've finished the break. And that's what I went through on before every break. That's pretty good practice in business too. See yourself, I don't know, on the ringing the bell. Right. On the stock exchange, or whatever it is, your aspirations or goals are, launching your first product. You got to visualize that, how it's going to look, how it's going to feel, and the reward, and set your intention, and then go out and execute.
How often do you do that nowadays? You do it like weekly, daily, monthly?
Not as frequent anymore. Definitely every quarter I have a big kind of, all right, like where am I at and where am I going? At the end of the year is another time, and this is one of the things I do with Todd Durkin. Has a mastermind group I'm in called the P10, the Power of 10, and he really holds us to task, as that's part of one of your structured tasks, is to really have, and it's not a quick jot down, it's like a 10-page document about what you did last year, where you're at, and where you're going. And it's laborious and arduous, and you're just like, oh, I don't want to do this. It's like doing taxes. And then you start and you get into it and you get a rhythm, and then you start going, whoa, this is kind of cool. And then all of a sudden it's almost like a grocery list at the store. All you do is go, oh, did I get this? Did I get that? Oh, I haven't done this yet. And it makes your life so much easier as a business entrepreneur.
Do you find it, like what you're doing, particularly with Todd, do you find that actually works? So you're coming up with these lists and you're actually achieving a lot of what's on it?
Absolutely. Well, this year we'll see. I've got some big things this year. I'm applying for the Idea Personal Trainer of the Year award. I'm still, even though I'm a fitness entrepreneur, I'm still training, anywhere from 25 to 55 clients a week. Something I'm, transitioning out of, but I've been doing that for 25 years, and I love it. I love impacting people like that. So I'm applying for that. I've got a new product I'm trying to launch. I've got another new product that I'm prototyping, and a digital online education course that I'm preparing for. So these are pretty big nuggets, pretty big rocks, and they take a lot of foresight and kind of diligence to get them going. And so and I've got a time. Each project I have a timeline. Okay, this has to be done by March. This has to be done by June. And all you do is go check your grocery list.
Do you use those same principles when you're working with clients and getting them to achieve some of their goals as well?
Yes. I mean, I've got a very interesting clientele. A lot of my folks are in their 60s, 70 years old. And so it's not like PRs on the squat, back squat or something. It's just trying to keep their bodies in one piece, keep them functioning, with range of motion and mobility and core strength. So I'm basically, my goal with them is to not mess them up and keep them strong and limber and then they go ski and they bike and they hike and they come back and like, oh, my back's tweaky. I skied moguls this weekend. And then it's my job to kind of fix them and get them back, and then they go do the same thing. So it's
a little bit different.
We're not making huge, it's more of a maintenance program. We're not making huge strides at 70, but you're trying to keep their strength and keep their posture and help them not go backwards.
Yeah. What sort of trends are you seeing? Like you are obviously out and about looking at what's happening. What are some of the things that you see in the fitness space in terms of less about products, but more about movements that you feel are things to keep an eye out on?
Yeah, so some of the trends, there's a huge trend in mobility, but also end range strength and mobility, which it's funny because it's always made sense to me. In fact, in martial arts, we do these drills where you would stand on one leg and your other leg would be as elevated as high as you could in the air. And you'd practice a series of different kicks, a round kick, a side kick, a turning kick, a back kick, and you would not let the other foot down, right? So you're at this end range, your muscles are stretched out on one aspect and then tight on the other aspect. And it was grueling. We did these, every week in Taekwondo. Well, now there's something called functional range conditioning, and they're doing similar drills where you're at the end range of your flexibility and mobility, and you're trying to create strength. And that's really cool, because that's when you get injured, is when you're stretched out and you lose your strength at the end range.
How are they training that then? Just drills in a standard position?
There's a system. Dr. Andrew Spinier, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but he's got this FRC program, and there's a series for your hips, for your shoulders, for the thoracic spine, and there's a learning curve, but it's really cool. It's just imagine doing the splits, but you're like Jean-Claude Van Damme style, where you have to elevate your body weight. That's like end range strength. That's a very simplistic example of what that is. So I see trends in mobility. Of course, there's trends in competitive fitness. I've got mixed feelings about that. I think fitness shouldn't necessarily be competitive, because when you compete, and I know this from experience, every time I've competed or trained to compete, I get injured.
Really?
Every single time. Because you're training, if you're competing at a high level, you're training at a high level, and you either get injured in the training or in the competition. Not always, but watch the NFL on any given Sunday, and they stretcher one guy out, another guy comes in. 10 minutes later, another guy leaves, another guy comes in. You're getting injured. So,
do you think, in terms of like general population of fitness, I suppose for me, having that competition in some level kind of keeps me going?
Yeah, because you're a freak.
But
you are. You're not. Go to the mall. Not in California. We're in California, by the way, at this podcast. And so probably if you went to the mall here, there'd be people drinking green drinks and with washboard stomachs. But if you go to a mall in Minnesota, or Ohio or wherever, and you look around, you just want to get them into the gym. Like, come on, Mrs. Jones, just come sit on the recumbent bike. Let's just try some spinning. Just get your body moving. Right. And I think, that's probably 70-80% of the people out there that really need help.
Right.
They just need to get into the gym and have an environment that they feel comfortable in. So it's fun. I like it. For some people, it's very motivating. Another thing is like the Fitbits and all the metrics and measuring your foot strikes and your acceleration and how much exercise you've done, and you're counting your calories. And there's a lot of sophistication to that. And I think it's pretty cool, because people love numbers. Mm-hmm. And you'll hear them saying, I got 2,000 steps today, and it's like it's a social badge of honor. Like, hey, I'm doing it. I'm moving. My zone has heart rate monitors, and you can see kind of where you're at on the screen, and you can see where your other people's heart rates are at, and you can tell how hard you're working relative to the rest of the class. That kind of interaction and fun competition, I think, is really healthy and really trendy. And then, of course, all the virtual, you get on a bike or a treadmill now, and you can either be led by an instructor like Peloton, or at home, Mirror. An instructor can take you through workouts. Or if you want to ride up the Alps on a bike, you can get the road, the actual road that's up the Swiss Alps, and that's really cool stuff. Personally, I'm very simple, and so I think there's all this technology, and I think it's great, but I think there is going to be a pendulum swing back to people want community. They want an experiential time outside of their own home. I find it hard to work out at home. A lot of people are motivated, they can do it, but you got a lot of distractions. The TV's over here, the refrigerator's over there, your wife or your husband, your kids are yelling at you. And so I think there will be there will be a shift or pendulum swing back to these experiential workout facilities, boutique gyms, and all the boot camp fitnesses and CrossFits, and equipment too. Some people, they don't want to have a manual to figure out how to operate a Fitbit or a simple treadmill. It's like you need to be a rocket scientist. And so the latest it's funny, because my inventions have gone from the Rip Trainer, very hard to educate, learn how to do the movements, hard to coach and cue. to the Nautilus Glute Drive, you kind of just sit in the thing and go up and down. It's fairly basic. And my next product is, again, very basic, very simplistic, but way far on the other side of the spectrum from technology. It's like old school farm strong type product. And so I'm excited to see how it does.
Yeah. But that's interesting you say that, like, because we years ago were actually selling the Rip Trainer, and it was a great product. When you were in front of anyone, it was fantastic. And I've been in rooms with people and just see everybody light up when they use it, and they instantly get it. But in order to sell it and for it to catch on, it almost seems as though it's so ahead of the curve, and that there's a lot of education needed for people to sort of get how you use it. And what's your thoughts about that in terms of innovation? Can you be too innovative? And if you are innovative, is it a case of you've really got to invest a lot in educating people on how to use it? Or what's your thoughts
absolutely.
on that?
I think it's a hindrance to progress and evolution. People want simplicity. I mean, think about the stress that we have in our daily lives. Get up, sleep deprived, get the kids fed, get them to school, got to rush into work. You work, and then you got, okay, I'm going to go to the gym. Do I go to the gym? Yeah, I'm going to go to the gym. And now I got to learn how to use some fancy piece of equipment and that I don't understand, and there's education, and I'm going to spend 10 minutes trying to figure something out. No, it's just like, a treadmill's pretty cool. You get on, you hit go, and there's a speed and elevation. And if you put it on manual mode, there's always going to be treadmills. There's always going to be space and room for simple, easy, efficient, and effective products. I think there's also some room for these tech geeks. And listen, the millennials are, the younger generation that's pretty active and fit. They don't mind spending 20 minutes to learn how to use a new phone or something. But, from what I understand, the iPhone is not the best phone. There's like the Samsung and these other phones are better, and they've got better cameras, better functionality. But the iPhone's pretty easy to use. I mean, it's so easy. Like everything's, I use the iMovie on there, and so
you just figure it out. I guess I was thinking when I was running today, no one ever taught me how to use it. You just find little bits.
It's pretty intuitive. Yeah. So I think if you can blend technology with a user-friendly interface, you hit the jackpot on anything. I shy away from any software, any program where there's this huge learning curve. I don't care how powerful it is. I just don't have time, and I'm scared. I'm intimidated. I didn't grow up. When I grew up in college, we didn't have computers. We had word processors. It was basically a glorified typewriter, for writing reports. And so when I have a problem, I go to my kid, my 13-year-old, like, hey, Brooke, help fix this phone. I don't know what's going on. And she just navigates, and within a minute, she's got it figured out. It's amazing.
Well, how do you think that leaves in education? Because I guess certainly one of the things that you see, and I've even noticed it here in California, where if you are a trainer, it's very difficult to provide education, and if you provide it if you run a club, you've kind of got to pay people plus pay for the course. So it seems to be very difficult to move the needle in terms of knowledge. And I've listened to you, and some of the things you come out with is just amazing. And you think that it would be great if more people actually knew about this. But there seems to be this move to, like you say, from a business perspective, if you can make it simple without a lot of education that anyone can pick up, it works. But then is that necessarily moving people's knowledge forward? How do you see that?
I think it is. And if you look at truly brilliant people, let's use educators, truly brilliant educators, they have this unique, I don't know if it's innate or learned, but this ability to take complex subject matter and distill it down to the bare essentials and disseminate it in a way that's easily digestible by the audience. That's a brilliant educator. So you can advance concepts. You just got to be smart enough to figure out how to make them simple. And one of my favorite people in the world, his name's Chris Frankel, and he's the performance specialist at TRX. He's been there off and on for years, and he was there when went there, and he's done extensive work in the military, and he came up with this program, the Force program, and it was military training, and it was, but I mean, it was like, I mean, you had to hunker down to figure out this program. You're like, okay, whew, here we go. You know, page one, and you really have to spend some time with it and get versed at it. And it was a brilliant program, but to some extent, I think even now he'd be the first to admit he's trying to simplify his delivery method, because not everybody's an operative, you know, in Afghanistan that has that mindset to go, okay, I can figure out how to take an AK-47 apart and put it back together, and you know, they're more clinical like that. A lot of people now, they just give it to me quick, give it to me easy, and you know, get me on my way. So, you know, education can be simple and effective. And I tell people that all the time. I do a lot of fitness business consulting with people that are launching educational products and components, and they have these big, in-depth biomechanical analysis and kinesiology and anatomy. And I said, listen, you got to simplify this. And everything's like 1, 2, 3. You know, here's the setup, here's what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, and here's how to execute. Just simple stuff. And then once you get them, then you can always have secondary tracks where you're introducing more education or the next level. But you don't overwhelm people, and you know, that's what you see in school. You know, when you go to those classes that are like organic chemistry or something, and people are just like deer in the headlights, and it's just too much at one time.
Yeah. Would you put that, so when you did the Rip Trainer, would you put like that into sort of quite complicated for, you know, it's not something that people just pick up and use if, you know, you got to spend a bit of time with it?
Yeah, it definitely was a product that needed education. It was good and bad. Of course, the good part of it is you can sell education if you're in the fitness business, and then it gives you a chance to get these touch points with other trainers, get them versed in the system, build some culture through the instructor and the camaraderie, tell them more about the iteration and the true essence of this product and how it was evolved, and get them, you know, keyed up on how to do the exercises. And then you have like a disciple. So there's good parts of the education. The problem is you have to have people to educate in Nebraska, in Iowa, in Florida, in California, in Chicago, and New Mexico. I mean, how do you do that? You have to train all these people, and then what if there's not enough students in New Mexico, but 2 people really want to take the course? Well, they're stuck. So then you have to do digital education. Well, digital education is very difficult, especially on a product like that that's kind of 3-dimensional. So there's some inherent problems, and that's why I started making more simplified products, because I think there's a beauty in simplicity.
So what do you think is the future for things like, you know, like the previous product, like where you have got something that's genuinely good, can make a big difference, but it's going to need that? Do you think it's breaking it down and doing, you know, using technology more? Because I guess a lot of people in the space that we're in, they've got clubs, or they've got numbers of clubs, and they've got probably hundreds or thousands of trainers, and they're trying to figure out how to raise that level.
You can, again, digital education is very popular and it's effective. People, if you make it simple enough, people can figure it out, and they can run through the program, the protocol, and be effective practitioners. But it's how you deliver it. And a lot of people spend too much time trying to sound knowledgeable, even sometimes aloof in their knowledge base about what they're talking about, instead of saying, hey, I don't care about me. It's about how do I get my knowledge and how do I get my content to a third party that could be a new trainer. They could have 1 year experience, or they could have 10 years. But can you talk to both at the same time without insulting one, and educating them on the simplest, easiest, and most efficient way to get started on learning this new modality? It can be done. It doesn't matter if it's the Viper or the ripcord or the TRX Rip Trainer or the Bosu ball or the TRX suspension trainer, or whatever modality it is you're working on. You can develop simple and easily digestible education and deliver it digitally.
Right. Okay. So 2 questions, but before we finish, like if people are interested in finding out about you or your products or what you're up to, where can people go?
So I'm very excited because I just launched a website, which by the way is probably 10 years overdue, but I did it, okay. It's PH1 Performance, the number one, performance.com, and it really has all my products, my book, a background about how I got into the industry and what I do and why I do it. And there's a lot of information and content on there. I'm also on social media at Pete Holman 1 on Instagram
And you do some
Twitter.
cool videos, and I've followed some of your stuff. So if you're a trainer, you're putting out some valuable content.
Yeah, I mean, I really pride myself, and there's very little hero posts, put it that way. I'm still a fairly good level athlete, even after all these orthopedic injuries. So, you'll see me moving around, but I try to develop content that helps trainers or fitness enthusiasts how to keep their body healthy and strong and vibrant. And I'm also starting to do some stuff on layering it in there on fitness, entrepreneurship, and business hurdles that we have to overcome, and motivation. So I think there's a little something for everybody on my social media platforms.
Yeah. Okay. And what's your Instagram page? Pete Holman.
Pete Holman 1
Okay.
on Instagram and Twitter, and then I'm just at Pete Holman on Facebook.
Okay. Cool. Two more questions then, Pete. So what's next for Pete? You've had you've launched some pretty interesting products. What do you got coming? What can we expect to see from you in the next few years?
Well, I've got a couple products in the hopper. One that I'm very excited about to launch at Ursa in 2020. Fingers crossed, right? Because you never know how these projects go. But it's a in strength and conditioning, we have something called grips, hips, and core, right? And it's just you have to have a strong grip to do anything, right? That's you're only as strong as your weakest link. So if you don't focus on your grip strength, you're missing the boat. The hips are extremely important. They're the kind of the powerhouse of your lower body, and they dictate function from ambulation, walking, to running, to jumping, to lunging and squatting. So you got to strengthen your hips and stabilize your hips. And then, of course, the core. We've talked about the core forever, and that's where all your performance comes from. I had tremendous results with martial arts because of all my core conditioning, not just being able to deliver rotational power and force at velocity, but also to absorb impact and blows, getting kicked in the stomach and punched in the stomach. So grips, hips, and core. Anyhow, my new product is all about grips, hips, and core. So, stay tuned, check it out at a club or facility near you.
Okay, cool. And then final question, Pete. So Escape Your Limits is about escaping what you've believed is impossible and gone on to make it possible. What would be a memorable example of escaping your own personal limits?
Well, one of the most arduous times in my life was middle school. I was a little pup, not much older than your kids, 13 years old, 14 years old, and I was bullied. So believe it or not, this frame once was scrawny and gangly and awkward and late developing and very introverted personality, very shy. We just moved to a new school and moved to Colorado and enrolled in a new school. I didn't know anybody, didn't have any friends. And for whatever reason, I was a target for bullying. And it's amazing how when you're young, you're vulnerable, you're impressionable, and all you want to do is have respect from your classmates and people around you, and getting locked in lockers, getting slammed into lockers, having money stolen from me in plain sight. These experiences were extremely traumatic, and I didn't tell my parents. I haven't really talked about this much in my life, but once I got through those hurdles, it really empowered me to two things. One is I never wanted to be bullied again. And that might be some insight to how I ascended in martial arts so fast. I just was I had a hunger and thirst for that was kind of unparalleled. But the other thing is, it really gave me this understanding of empathy and trying to put myself in other people's shoes. And so, that's something I tell my daughter all the time. I said, don't lie, don't cheat, don't steal, and don't bully. You gotta be respectful and loving and nurturing towards other people. And, what else is it really all about? I mean, so I think that's the escaping some limits of my childhood. And by the way, that stuff has stuck with me. I mean, those are emotional scars when you feel so vulnerable and humiliated. And, one time I got locked in a locker and I was found by a janitor, like after hours. I mean, it was the most humbling experience of my life. And it was hard to hold my head up for the next week or two in class. And people just laughed at you and they thought it was fun and games, and here you are just eviscerated inside. And so it's just given me a profound respect for other people and what other people are going through, and how we can help elevate others and around us, whether it's our family, our coworkers, or just the general community we're in.
Yeah. Pete, thanks so much for your time. Wonderful story, and I look forward to seeing what's happening at Ursa this year.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Matthew.
you, mate.
Appreciate
Cheers.
it.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed this podcast. If you did, then please go over to iTunes and subscribe to the Escape Your Limits podcast. Leave a review, leave a comment. It really would help us a lot to continue to keep these going.